Get ready for the ultimate comic book extravaganza. Terrificon is back at Mohegan Sun in Uncasville, Connecticut from July 28th to the 30th. Over 100 comic book creators, tons of celebrities, and hundreds of vendors all under one roof. Meet your favorite comic book writers and artists, mingle with celebrities from movies and TV, and explore a treasure trove of comics and collectibles. Terrificon, where dreams come true for comic book fans. Don't miss out July 28th to 30th at Mohegan Sun in Uncasville, Connecticut. Get your tickets now at Terrificon.com. Terrificon, the ultimate comic book experience.
Hey everybody, welcome back to Word Balloon, the comic book conversation show. This is another great conversation from Terrificon, a Superman at 80 panel featuring four gentlemen who represent writing Superman from the 70s all the way to today.
If you read any of that era that we were on, there was contrast, and Bibble was there for humor, but he was also there for some pathos.
Yeah.
I mean, there was an aspect to all these characters that you're not going to read a comic where guys are just gritting their teeth for 20 pages. That was the era.
Comics today,
but that was the era we were existing in, and the pressure was everything had to be serious. Everything had to be,
Dark Knight,
dark and gritty. Yeah. Right. Superman had to have a gun.
There's Paul Kupperberg, Jerry Ordway, Roger Stern, and Pete Tomasi. A great conversation about the Man of Steel from the men that know him best. Honestly, such a great group of current and past creators at Terrificon, and it was a real pleasure to talk to some of these gentlemen for the very first time. Roger Stern was a first-timer on this panel, and even Pete Tomasi. So I hope you enjoy this conversation with the guys talking about the Man of Steel on today's Word Balloon. Word Balloon is brought to you by AlexRossArt.com. Alex will be at San Diego Comic-Con in just a few weeks. His booth number is 2415. You can't miss the Alex Ross booth. Always this incredible gallery presentation of some of his most iconic covers and interiors, but also new stuff as well that you will likely see on your favorite comic covers in the months ahead. Make sure you check out AlexRossArt.com at San Diego Comic-Con, booth 2415. It's always very distinctly and gigantically located in the center of the action in San Diego on the main convention floor. Check it out or go online for AlexRossArt.com. Word Balloon is brought to you by my followers, the League of Word Balloon Listeners. That's the name I gave my followers through Patreon. Patreon.com/wordballoon. Listen, things are tough this year. I won't deny it for me financially. If you've ever considered supporting Word Balloon, I could really use your help. So if you think Word Balloon is worth the price of a comic book, even $1 a month would be greatly appreciated. Patreon.com/wordballoon. Thank you very much for your patronage and your attention, the League of Word Balloon listeners. If you subscribe to Word Balloon, I will send you an email that will have a domino mask and cape and a nice League of Word Balloon listeners emblem that you've seen here on Word Balloon as well. But thank you for your support. Patreon.com/wordballoon. All right, without further ado, let's get into our conversation now with the men behind Superman. Lo those many years during some of Superman's most crucial periods, and it's great to get these guys together and have this discussion. Now, next door to our panel, the School of Rock was rehearsing. Bad idea. Occasionally, the music gets very loud, and I apologize for that. The organizers also apologize. They just didn't, think about the logistics, and that's all right. Conventions are always kind of a work in progress, and we know next year that they'll have things calm down. I have to admit, there were a couple loud kids at the Venom panel, but not as bad as the School of Rock kids. And it's great music, man. They sound fantastic, but didn't need a whole lot of love while some of our Superman creators were making their points on the stage. But I think you will still enjoy this excellent conversation between Roger Stern, Jerry Ordway, Paul Kupperberg, and Pete Tomasi, the men behind Superman, now on Word Balloon. The Man of Steel, 80 years. It's hard to believe. But here we are. absolutely, man. And truly, these guys deserve that kind of applause because they've been adding to the foundation that was started by Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster back in 1938 with Action Comics #1. My name is John Suntress. I host a podcast called Word Balloon. It's at wordballoon.com, and I get the opportunity digitally to interview great creators like our panel today. But today now, in person, it is a thrill for me to have these people share up their Superman stories. So I'm going to start all the way at the end with one of the finest writers that Marvel and DC has ever had the pleasure of employing and giving us the opportunity to read some of his amazing stories. The great Roger Stern, ladies and gentlemen. Next to him, another fantastic writer-editor who has done amazing work. In fact, just was on Word Balloon. Go to his website, paulkupperberg.com, because not only does he show script samples of various things that he's worked on, but really amazing gems of projects that he's been involved with that I've never heard of. And it's really a great exploration of the comic book history. Paul Kupperberg, everybody. Another fantastic artist and writer that contributed greatly to the Superman mythos and at a very important time, and we'll get into that in our discussion, the great Jerry Ordway. And finally, a guy who just wrapped up his Superman run that I think in a lot of ways, along with Dan Jurgens, the two of them course-corrected in the most positive way and brought Superman back to his greatness, the great Peter Tomasi. So 80 years of Superman and various incarnations and slight changes to the character. And Paul, you came in. Did you come in, Paul, at the tail end of the Julie Schwartz era?
I'm the earliest chronological writers on this. I started writing Superman around 1980 or 81. My first, I did an issue of DC Comics Presents with Masters of the Universe, and Dave Manick edited that because it was a special project with Julie Schwartz, kind of the guest editor. And I guess after he saw my issue, he thought, well, he didn't screw it up too bad. So he asked me to pitch stories to him, so I started pitching to Superman in Action and DC Comics Presents. And eventually I was writing the Superman syndicated newspaper strip, Supergirl, Superboy, and probably about a third to a quarter of the issues of Superman, Action, and DC Comics Presents. For 2 or 3 years.
And in addition to that, you wrote what was DC's first miniseries.
Yes, the World of Krypton miniseries.
I forgot about that.
That was originally done as a 3-issue arc in Showcase, for Showcase, which got canceled before it could run. So they put it in a drawer. They weren't going to do anything with it. And then the Superman movie was in the works as well. And there was a contractual issue with Mario Puzo, who wrote the original screenplay. And as a result, DC, nobody could do direct adaptations of the movie, which is why they published Elliot Madigan's most excellent Superman novelization in its place, even though it had Christopher Reeve's picture all over it. And so, in a panic looking for Superman-related but non-movie, they pulled this thing out of the drawer and said, well, we'll just, it created the miniseries. They actually advertised it as a limited, 3-issue run, which was the first time they'd ever done that. Normally, that was called cancellation. So I did. I did a lot of Superman. It was, as you well know, coming up with 4 or 5 foes who can fight God every month is really tough. Yeah, it wears on you.
Tell us about some of the villains that you created.
Oh man,
that stuck. If they the ones that have been doing.
The ones that were good, right? That's what he said.
There are none of those. No, none of those.
The ones that stuck.
No, I didn't really create many villains. There were villains around, and Julie Schwartz was going through a period at the time where he was down on what he called all the archaeologists. Yeah, he was like, all these guys are digging around and finding obscure stuff and trying to make it their own. Just, here, we've got all these great villains, use them. Okay, sure. I mean, the closest I came was in an issue of DC Comics Presents. I was the writer of, but not the creator of, the first Ambush Bug story.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely.
That was Keith Giffens. Julie brought us in to plot out an issue of DC Comics Presents with the Doom Patrol. And we were, who will he fight? And we were talking about stuff, and Keith said, well, I got this kind of wacky character. I'm sorry.
Hello, Connecticut!
Yeah, really. Jesus. This is a DC Comics Presents and Superman and Wrestling, apparently.
Let's see your hands, everybody. Let's rock!
Having worked for the WWE, I'm getting a sweat just
Jerry, I think to your era then, there's always, that...
ERA, not ERROR.
Exactly, ERA.
We're talking wrestling and baseball.
I am always fascinated when there's that feeling of they've got to strip down Superman. Scoutmaster, any chance you go to the other room and let him know?
Just go finish.
Thank you, buddy. You're a good man.
Yes.
See? Wally Good Scout, ladies and gentlemen. We appreciate it. Thank you.
Speaking of stripping down, Byrne,
Yeah,
of the character.
The music's playing. Okay, go ahead.
No, it's a good transition.
There was, during the 70s and the 80s, every writer who worked on Superman went to Julie Schwartz and said, let's do a series where Superman can't move the planet. Let's bring him back to that Siegel and Schuster purity. I know Marv Wolfman did it, I know Len Wein did it, I know I did it, I know Carey did it, Bates did it, so we were always trying to get them to pull back a little, give us some opportunity to kind of make a challenge, because if the good guy can't get hurt, who cares? Sure. He's fighting the guy and okay.
Yeah.
But they never went for it until Crisis came along and they brought back the shortly depowered, for a short while depowered Superman.
Well, and I know Danny O'Neill's run too in the 70s with the sand.
Yeah.
They did cut it back, but immediately when his story was done, he was pushing buttons.
Back to it, it was done.
So, Jerry, you were part of the Byrne era and the idea of not only getting rid of all the a lot of the great mythos, Kandor and the other Kryptonians and all that, but also de-aging Superman as well, making him 29 as opposed to kind of that father figure that he is suddenly becoming at.
Right. Yeah. Well, the big part about even the depowering, I saw the Superman movie and that was my favorite. I like the first one, and you accept the fact that he turns time back and all that stuff. We never wanted to do that, but we did like the vibe of what Clark and Smallville and all that kind of held. I think Roger affirmed this. One of the things we did with Superman was we tried to create different vulnerabilities for him. One being like his religious upbringing, making him a little more susceptible to magic and things like that, which did give us a lot more stories to do where you could have some character who wasn't necessarily Doomsday occupy an issue and not be laughable. You could do the prankster. A lot of these characters were funny. Mixius Pitalik was certainly formidable, but a lot of what was known as the rogues gallery was kind of thin because Superman, for all those years, Luthor really kind of was the prominent adversary.
You had Toyman and
right.
They were kind of.
It's not. Yeah. So we didn't have like multiple versions of Kryptonite. Really, we reintroduced a lot of stuff, and that was the other part about Byrne's relaunch was it wasn't that stuff would never happen. It was we finally get a chance to reintroduce it rather than it's been around and there's 25 varieties of Kryptonite or whatever. But yeah, one of the things we had on the book was it was always an issue of trying to come up with villains, and I'm sure that all of us have come up with our own version of lame villains. Not all of them stick, as you say, but when you're filling a monthly comic, you really do want to give people something different, and you don't want to keep going into the well. And at the time at DC Comics, the editors were all very protective of their villains, so you couldn't have a Batman villain necessarily come into a Superman book without jumping through hoops or what have you. So in a lot of cases, I came up with characters that were stand-ins for the characters we couldn't use. I wanted to use Vandal Savage. We couldn't use him because he was in the Flash. They wouldn't give him to us. So he became Mr. Z. And it fulfilled the story that we wanted to do. It didn't necessarily need to be a regular character.
That's awesome. No, yeah, and again, that's great.
Gangbuster came in because I couldn't use the Guardian. And in a way, Gangbuster became a much better part of Superman than the Guardian would have been for me, because it allowed me to do a Hispanic character and a new character, basically, that could be intertwined in the Superman, Clark, Lois triangle.
Agreed. Well, and both Jerry and Roger, you guys not only created villains, but also added to the Daily Planet cast as well. Jerry and I we did a podcast conversation about a month ago, and he talked about the inclusion of Cat Grant and Ron Troop and some of these other people. And I always feel like Superman's supporting characters, any great hero needs that Greek chorus of civilians to rub up against and show the contrast. And I think, Roger, as you wrote the character and stuff, can you talk about the supporting cast and, what you wanted to do with them?
Yeah, well, if any of you remember the old George Reeves Adventures of Superman, so you would think that there were like 3 reporters that worked for this major newspaper, and it would always show a city room with other characters in there, and so we started giving them names and personalities just so they would be more than window dressing. And there was Wit. I mean, there was the one fellow who never said more than 2 or 3 words in a row, and so when Clark was leaving the planet to go off to news time or something, Wit actually said like 4 words in a row. And Clark was like, I've never heard you say this much before. And Wit says, tell me not to lie. So there's always some guy like that. Some guy who talks loud, some guy who never says anything. But
very few Steve Lombards.
Very few Steve Lombard. We sort of did a spin on Steve Lombard because people kept saying, we're going to see Steve Lombard. So we made him a jockey.
Oh, cool.
And you almost never even heard about it. And you would occasionally throw in a gag, well, he's too big, too long, or something. But Jerry was at least partially responsible for one of the really great supporting characters in the Superman stories, Bilbo.
Yes, absolutely.
It was just a wonderful character, and a wonderful character to write.
Well, the funny thing about, I guess, the fact that there were multiple Superman titles is that we each kind of staked out certain characters for the background and for the. I used in Adventures of Superman. I built stuff around Bibbo and around the bar, the Ace of Clubs, and these are all things from my childhood. And Bibbo was a real person in my childhood, and so. That was an odd thing, I think, for a lot of people. And when I saw a bar scene in Superman Returns or something, I said, well, I know that's because of me, because I don't think Superman would have ever been in a bar in the previous, 50 years of the history of the character. But each of us had characters. Roger would deal with a lot of Lex Luthor stuff, and Dan staked out his own side characters to develop, and that's how we made 3 and then 4 and then 5 books a month interesting. Each one had a little bit different flavor, with the main guys being Superman kind of holding them together. They weren't all continued. The subplots continued. That was the important thing. The subplots could continue, but we would gang up and do a big story like Panic in the Sky or what have you. Those were the special kind of where the books went from, it was like, Roger to Dan to me to Louise or whatever. Otherwise, we did get to do individual stories, one issue stories or what have you.
Absolutely. No, it was a great period, and I certainly want to get into Doomsday, The Death of Superman, The Rise. Also with, obviously, the DVD coming out recently and stuff. But Pete, one of the things that I think... prior to you and Dan Jurgens coming back to the book, in Dan's case, but one of the big contentions was back and forth was the Superman-Lois relationship. And I know for the New 52 period, again, a period where they decided to de-age Superman. And you had Jurgens wrote stuff for that. George Perez wrote stuff for that.
Yeah, I was doing Superman, Wonder Woman.
There you go. Of course, shame on me. And then, but no, honestly, was it prior to Convergence? Convergence was that event before the New 52. Was it before the New 52 that started?
No, it was Jurgens.
Oh no, it was DC.
Flashpoint.
No,
Flashpoint led to the 52.
Well, that led to the New 52. You're right about that period.
Convergence brought Lois and Clark back.
Right, and that's what I wondered, Pete, as far as whatever the editorial decision of, let's return Superman, not only the relationship and have Lois and Clark together again, but ultimately too John Kent,
right,
and Superman back to being a father figure.
Yeah, I mean that was all Jurgens in terms of bringing them together in Convergence, and then when we were at a summit, based on what Pat Gleason and I had done on Batman and Robin, Dan had felt that we could really bring a lot to a family dynamic. So he said, do you guys want to handle this family dynamic and really open it up? And we were like, yeah, absolutely, that'd be great. So that's kind of how we sort of took the ball from Lois and Clark that Dan and Lee Weeks were doing, and then just kind of ran with it and opened it up even further. And but it was great, and it was a lot of fun because obviously when you're writing a book with Bruce as a parent and a book as Clark as a parent, you're talking complete polarization of characters. So it was really a lot of fun to examine two father-son angles, and obviously with Lois on the other side, but two father-son angles that were very different, and the way that kids were obviously brought up very different.
And certainly we explored that as well in Super Sons, and Super Sons is coming back.
It came back. Just came back actually last week.
Oh, great!
Yeah.
Oh, fantastic. Okay.
Yeah,
good.
it was. I think June was the last issue, or May, and then DC realized it was good. It would be better to have that book out on the stands.
Absolutely.
And so they were kind enough to listen to my pleading and put it back out. So we're really happy with it. I look at that. Super Sons to me is like a 8 years old to 80 years old book. It's a great gateway book, but it's still a lot of fun to read for anybody who's a comic fan and enjoys fun, lighter adventures, but just a kinetic feel between the characters that are so different.
A lapsed reader came back to comics because of Super Sons, one of my good friends. So I understand. I want to open it up to questions because, again, these guys represent 40 years of Superman's legacy, but also can really talk about the entire 80 years. So, sir, please get started.
Working with Superman's Pro Gallery, what were some of your favorite films that you guys worked on, either creating or adapting your own ways?
Let's go down the line. Favorite villains. Yeah, favorite villains. Yeah, I know. Sorry. All right. Enjoy the concert. What can I tell you?
Rock on.
Roger, your favorite villains?
Lex, of course, was always a major villain. I enjoyed working on Brainiac and bringing him back in Bruce.
Yeah.
We also think it was almost a relay race because Jerry Ewan started up Brainiac and says, "Okay, now he's in this position," and I said, "Okay, now he's in this position," and the next, now he's in this position. So he kept getting tougher and tougher until he took over Warworld.
Right.
Oddly enough, I think my favorite character we worked on for villain was Terrorman.
I love Terrorman.
Yeah, I mean, it was a goofy, 1970s era supervillain.
Space cowboy.
He was a space cowboy. He rode this mechanical kind of Bronco thing, and he had these 6 guns that shot all kinds of high-tech stuff. And there's just something amazingly goofy funny about writing, Superman going up against, Matt Dillon. Yeah.
Did Neil Adams do the first Terrorman story?
I think Neil did do the first Terrorman.
Okay, and that probably had a lot to do with our love of the character. I mean, at least I can only speak for myself.
I think Carrie Bates created it.
Oh, there you go. Wow.
And there was just, I remember the cover. It was an Eduardo Barreto cover.
Oh, that's great.
Action Comics. And it was, Superman standing there against a bar, like an Old West bar, and there's a bar mirror behind him, and he's backed up against the bar afraid, and in the mirror you see the reflection of Terror Man, ready to draw Superman. It's like, come on.
Hilarious.
How do you not love that?
Absolutely.
I have to have my contrast here because when Carla and I would read the mail for the books, and it was pretty much right after Byrne had left, and we were always scratching our heads like people saying we want to see Terror Man, and we're like, why does anybody want to see Terror Man? Now we realize that it was Paul Kupperberg writing these. But so after
the crisis didn't erase all the good stuff.
After a while, I said, okay, well, I'm going to do Terror Man, and I'll just do because we're reintroducing everything, and I thought Terror Man's like an eco-terrorist guy, and I still, had fun doing that. The cover I did was a showdown cover, Superman in the foreground, Terror Man in the background, but I always felt the main appeal of that was the fact that Neil Adams had a hand in, even if it was a small part of it. And I do own a page of that. I actually wound up finding a page of Terror Man, which is also kind of amusing. My favorite, oddly enough, my favorite story that I did when I was writing Superman I liked working with Mr. Mxyzptlk because he was kind of unpredictable. And again, I think Byrne came up with some good twists and made him much more powerful in a sense, rather than just being a pest. But I really liked, not that he's a great villain, but I really enjoyed writing Prankster.
Wow.
And I had the one issue that I did with the Prankster where Morgan Edge is in the hospital. I had the Prankster just totally terrorize this guy because he deserved it. But as all the stuff I did, that was one of my favorite issues to do because it was just fun. And a lot of times we would just do stuff that would make the editor laugh. Not that you could make Julie Schwartz laugh necessarily, but
you could, but it involved electrodes.
Ask him to fry lunch.
Yankee bean soup. On a similar note, I did a Toyman story called The Great Toyman Trivia Contest. And Toyman gets out of prison, and instead of he starts his contest about himself, a televised thing, and it's whole big elaborate stuff. And then finally, turns out he's looking to get the guy who stole his favorite toy when he was a kid, and he knew that this guy would know the answer to the question and thereby smoke him out with this contest. Can you get any more of a waste of 18 pages for Superman?
Well, that's an Eisner winner right there.
But it's just you have to do this goofy stuff. You have to get it out of your system because otherwise it's so deadly serious. And so, every now and then they've just got to, Superman's just got to look at the reader and go, okay.
But it offers contrast.
Yeah,
and that was if you read any of that era that we were on, there was contrast. And Bibble was there for humor, but he was also there for some pathos.
Yeah.
I mean, there was an aspect to all these characters that you're not going to read a comic where guys are just gritting their teeth for 20 pages. That was the era.
Comics today,
but that was the era we were existing in, and the pressure was everything had to be serious. Everything had to be,
Dark Knight,
everything. Right. Superman had to have a gun. I mean, it's just stupid stuff. It doesn't all have to be the same, and I think all of us would agree with that.
Yeah, the best books are ones that walk that line or are on the fence of giving you drama, pathos, levity, and obviously rock'em sock'em robots. So it's that's how we approached it even when we took over Superman, Pat and I. It was in a weird way that when we did the pitch, we were we wanted DC to know right away that the A story, the A and a B, exact that kind of stuff. The A story was going to be there was no big, crazy, overarching villain or anything. It was really the family just going through their life with the stuff that was going to be happening to them. That was the plot. And then, of course, we'd have the villain be a B story and stuff, and it would sort of intertwine and come into the A story. But we wanted them to know that, we weren't just we wanted this book to feel more like, a family drama that, you hadn't seen before, and really explore these relationships instead of, go balls to the wall action all the time. So it was really key for us to balance that out, and we really enjoyed that run for the 40 some odd issues. It was great.
Ultimately, you have to get away from the superheroics and the fighting, because if you just did Superman stories where it was just Superman, he was never Clark Kent, you never did, this would be the dullest damn character.
Yeah, it would be.
I got invited to write a Lone Ranger short story for an anthology, a prose thing. And I started writing this story, and I found that I could not find a character in the Lone Ranger. I found him totally devoid of anything, and couldn't write. So I had to change my story and do a story about some other people, and the Lone Ranger was peripheral.
And that's how you got into it. You come through this. Yeah,
right.
That makes sense.
So you need, like when I was doing Superboy in the 80s, the whole thing was Clark Kent is a wuss. Clark Kent don't play baseball, he doesn't date, he doesn't do anything. If he gets his hair wet, he'll get a cold, So I homeschooled, that's right. So, but he was just supposed to be this pampered, that was the bit. If I do this, the other kids might suspect I'm Superboy.
Right.
As opposed to every other kid in town does this, and nobody suspects they're Superboy.
Right.
So you're just paranoid and you need to get over it. So I started, first I introduced a girlfriend for him.
Beyond Lana? Beyond Lana Lang?
Oh, yeah. A whole new character. In fact,
What was her name?
Lisa. That's right, thank you.
What was her last name? Lisa Davis.
Yeah.
Okay.
And in fact,
biographer.
And in fact, Julie and I had plans. We were going to bring her back to Superman, and she was going to show up and go, Clark, I need your help. I need Superman's help. And Clark goes, well, I'll see if I can. She goes, come on, Clark. I know. I dated you, But so we had that, and then one day there's a baseball game, so he goes in and he goes, all right. I just won't use my powers. I won't, I'll just be... And he hits the ball and he gets to first base or whatever, and all the kids go, oh, good, hey, nice shot, Clark. And from then on, I just stopped treating him like that wuss, and he was just another one of those kids, and it made him infinitely more interesting.
I'm glad you said that, because honestly, that is, to me, it was the one thing about the Weisinger and partially Julie Schwartz era was Clark the wuss. And I always loved on a television show that George Reeves, Clark Kent was not a wuss. He was an investigative reporter. And when Lois and Jimmy were in trouble, it was, I wish Mr. Kent were here. He would know what to do. Right. It was never, oh, Superman, save us. And really, I always, anytime I talk to a DC writer, a Superman writer, I always ask, so, is he Clark or is he Cal, guys? So Pete, start. Is he Clark or is he Cal?
I don't know. I just always looked at him as one person. It's kind of that's just the way I approach Superman. To me, he was always just, a being of, obviously Krypton, obviously of Earth, but an upbringing of his parents. He was
Clark Kent.
He was Clark Kent. That was, he was,
Mark Miller would disagree.
I know.
I had a great dinner with him at C2E2 this year, and he's very happy to point out that his comparison, and honestly, guys, I want to hear.
Yeah, I heard of that.
That he was so highly evolved as a Kryptonian. He's like it would be like us being raised by a colony of ants. And again, I disagreed with Mark, but I thought it was an interesting.
You can't once you start with the Kansas template. That's who he is.
Yep.
The nurture of that place is what made him who he is.
But that wave of Wade and Morrison and Miller, that was what we were kind of working against in a sense, because that was why Superman didn't need to be revamped. They wanted 50s stories. They wanted all that stuff, and that was certainly John Byrne came in with a job to do, and the job was to make it relevant. I mean, you throw out stuff, you keep stuff, but basically what he always did, he goes to the source.
Right.
And you look at the first year of Superman, and it's there. First year of Batman, it's all there. But I always felt like the template from the movie, mainly because the Smallville stuff in the first Superman movie was so rich, it was warm, it was very Norman Rockwell.
Yep. The first 40 minutes.
Once you attach to that, it's hard to ever go, how would this guy be like some cold, clinical, Kryptonian? Well, we played with that too. I mean, Roger, we did that with the Krypton Man, and we were trying to contrast that. But yeah, I mean, your way of getting into any of these characters. If I was writing an alien, I wouldn't think it would be that fun. I mean, you have to find a way into it. Where you have Clark Kent, it's an immediate, I know that guy.
Right.
You don't know that he's Superman, but you know that guy based on, he grew up here, and
And it gets to a point, we've reached a point with comic books now where everything gets overthought.
Yeah.
You're trying to base, I'm working with some guy on some project, and he pretty much a civilian, but whatever. And he got, well, how does the time machine work? We got to know how the time machine works. I got.
Let me get the schematics.
I said,
study up on it again.
I said it's a time machines don't exist. So we can just say it's a time machine, and it travels through time. You don't have to know how it works because it's fiction. So we're accepting it. We accept that he can fly.
But what if someone has to fix it?
I never thought of that.
That's where you come in, Jared.
Well, so
Thank God I kept the manual.
You can't overthink this stuff. It's not real. And the minute you start trying to force reality into it, it just shows you how fragile it is and what it's really made of. So you accept Tarzan was raised by apes. Okay.
How he learned toilet training was beyond us.
We don't have to know.
It's mythology. It's pure American mythology.
Exactly. It's like, mythology, nobody questions, Zeus did this or that. Well, but she was his daughter. How come she didn't do... No, it's mythology. Just go with it.
Wonder Woman was made of clay, so
that's right.
Sure.
Was she?
You just, and I'm saying,
made out of lesbian clay.
Lesbian clay.
And I met Art Clokey numerous times, and he insisted Gumby was real.
Really? Okay. Well, he was older then.
Yeah, he was.
More questions, please, Miss.
Superman has all these powers. What's your favorite power to write about and draw about?
Oh, favorite power?
Favorite power? Flight, I would think. I mean, there are other characters who fly, but he enjoys it. I would if I could fly.
Yeah, that's always the number one. I mean, but I do love when he just blasts people with his eyes. I mean, that's always, you can't get it right. When you can just say, and now the heat vision explodes from his eyes and sears whatever. That's always fun too. Well, that's when he really lets loose with his powers with the heat vision. That's that great moment in that Alan Moore, Dave Gibbons story, The Man Who Has Everything, and Mongol has torn his heart out, burn, and it's like, whoa. That was one of the first times I really felt that power. And that was the first time you really said, "Wow, that heat vision!" When he lets loose with that, that's pretty awesome.
Well, because previous to that, they only really showed it as little pinpoints. For the most part, it was like
melting,
and it was never really to harm.
Firing pin in the gun, or
never really to take somebody out. Absolutely.
I always. I like flight. I just, Christopher Reeve really made it just like his Superman in flight was beautiful.
It had an elegance to it.
This guy just was like ballet in the air. It was really great. So that would be mine.
Did the movie impact your guys? How did it impact your guys' writing? Raj, how did it impact your writing?
Really a combination of the first Chris Reeve movie and the George Reeve series. I love George's Clark. Very smart, very witty, very urbane. Didn't put up with a lot of silliness from Lois. Superman had to put up with silliness from Lois. But Chris made me believe that the disguise worked.
Yeah.
If you remember the scene where Superman and Lois have been out on the town, and Superman goes, "Well, goodbye," and as he's leaving, you hear at the front door. And Lois comes through the apartment, opens the door, and there's Clark. A little subtle thing on how fast he is. And she comes in, and she's all distracted from being out with Superman. And Clark runs over, "Well, we were supposed to get together and have dinner." And she turns around, goes, "Right, Clark." And he turns around, and he sort of grins, and he takes off his glasses, and he straightens up, and then he straightens up again.
Yeah.
And you're like, "Oh my God, yes, Superman is like 2 to 3 inches taller than Clark."
Yes.
Lois. "Yes, Clark? I thought you were going to handle it." Oh my God, it works!
Yeah.
It works!
Yeah.
Frank Whiteley in All-Star Superman with Grant Morrison, I think, was one of the artists that also played on that. And even though he was still kind of the same size, he was hunched over and had that neat look and stuff. So
yeah.
No, you can't at that. I mean, when I saw it, I was 16, I can't remember, but it was, it can't help but leave an imprint on you, the movie. I mean, it definitely informed when I got around to working on it. It definitely was there, without a doubt. Chris Reeve was he was, my Superman. I saw the repeats on the Reeve stuff, and I did enjoy it, but Reeve was the main template for me.
Yeah. I was going to say, with the movie, that was another kind of limitation in a sense that the movie reintroduced kind of a nerdy Clark Kent, which you can get away with in a movie because there's a movie every 3 years or something like that. With the comic, we knew when we relaunched it that it wasn't going to be Clark as playing the nerd character necessarily because it just was kind of a dead end. Same with Lois jumping off of buildings, waiting for Superman to save her.
Yeah.
It might be fun to play and touch on those old stories, but the movie really it was a warmth of the character and the fact that he really embodied it. And I'll go with Roger as well. I saw the TV Superman when I was a kid in reruns, and I always thought he did seem distinct, even though he was virtually identical as Clark Kent and Superman. He just seemed like a likable guy, and I always felt like that was one of the most important aspects. If you have a character as powerful as Superman, that he should be a likable person, because if he's not trusted, and people are scared of him, right? So that was the key for me, and I think we're always fighting that tide of what if Superman goes bad? Well, if you do that once, no one will ever trust him again. Yeah. That's why he's the Boy Scout. That's the main. And again, the movie I think does evoke that and project that to a degree.
And the I Love Lucy episode too.
Yes,
absolutely. Fantastic.
I grew up on the George Reeves Superman show. He is for many reasons, including a crappy home life and stuff. Superman was a lodestone to me. And George Reeves will always be my definitive Superman. I believe that there could be a man that good and that righteous who could do this. I believe George Reeves totally convinced me that yes, a man can do this. A man can be this way. Christopher Reeve made me believe a man can fly. He really did. Literally was that. It was like, oh yeah, this can be made to have that feeling of reality. Because the TV show certainly didn't. It was. I was going to joke before that one of my favorite abilities of Superman's powers was his ability to duck when a gun was thrown. Because the bad guys would shoot the gun and there were no bullets, so they bounce off them. But then when they threw the gun, it's like, oh, this shit's real.
Robert World, the comedian, did a great bit about that. Exactly. They throw the gun.
So and the fact that Superman and Clark Kent look identical is irrelevant. Because if you buy the bit, if you buy the shtick, you buy the bit.
Right.
So accept it. And back during the Schwartz era, again, there was an attempt to explain why nobody recognized Clark Kent.
Magic glasses.
Magic glasses. It was a story written by a dear friend of mine, Marty Pascoe, who would break my head for reminding the audience that this story existed because he is so embarrassed. But the bit was, it turns out that nobody recognizes Clark because he made the lenses of his glasses from the Kryptonian glass in his rocket ship, and he gives off some kind of unconscious super hypnosis that through the glasses made yes, exactly.
If we're gonna buy the
that is why you have to accept the bit and not worry about it.
Now you can use that.
Yeah, that's it.
Everybody's giving you permission.
Well, actually, I'm off it.
I was going to say, I'll email Bendis and I'll let him know. With magic glasses, all right.
And Marty will say it was Julie's idea. I had nothing to do with it. No, you wrote it.
But again, going back to the movie, those were some of the greatest moments as well. When as Clark, everyone's just pushing away, the elevator doors close without him making it, and just that whole he's a face in the crowd, and we ignore Clark, and that's.
I think that was over the top. I think they were playing it too much for comic effect. Because again. nobody is going to believe that this schmuck, this nerd, is this brilliant investigative reporter. It's not viable,
That was his first appearance.
But yeah,
so, it's easy to excuse him.
Still,
I always thought. I'm sorry. One of the things I was going to mention is popping in my head, thinking about all the Superman movie stuff. But I was thinking about how when I was working on Superman. And I was a fan of what John Byrne was doing, and I'd get copies of these issues as I was working on my thing. And I remember seeing that first one where basically Lex Luthor, has the cracks the code, figures out Clark Kent is Superman. Someone says, "No, here's the deal," and he's like, he refuses to believe it. Yep. I always thought that was the greatest thing because, again, it's a comic book, it's not real world, but it was a kind of a real world kind of thing where you'd go, okay. Why would he be? Why would Superman be somebody else?
Right.
And that was from Lex Luthor's perspective, because Lex Luthor would like to be Superman.
Yeah, as far as the general public is concerned, he's always Superman. Right. He doesn't wear a mask.
It's not like
that's right. Batman wears a mask. Batman has something to hide.
Right.
Maybe he's really ugly.
Right.
Batman has something to hide. Superman has nothing to hide.
Right.
You can see his face. He's out there all the time.
Right.
Where is he? Well, he's probably going to the other side of the planet, stopping a typhoon or something.
Right. Or in outer space, keeping the meteors away.
Keeping the meteors away. Superman's a busy guy. And yes, Superman's a busy guy, which is why he needs to come home and be Clark and unwind. But any Caucasian male of a certain height and build and dark hair looks like Superman. We were talking like the thing that Chris did in the movie, standing up again. Something that people have forgotten over the years, and I came across this in doing some research for a Superman project one time. In the very earliest days of the Siegel and Schuster Superman, Clark had a different face. And in fact, a superpower that everyone forgot about was that Superman could change his face.
Yep.
Change his face. He did that. And everyone had forgotten about that. So that, by the late 80s, when they asked me to do Starman, I said, "Oh, Superman doesn't use this power anymore. I'll do Starman." That's great. It's a good power. I'll steal it. And you look at the early stories, and Clark had a different face, and Superman was taller and broader and stood differently. A lot of different body language. And over the years, and this was partly because Joe had some vision problems, and Superman was so popular that the company wanted more and more Superman product, so there were more and more assistants. And the assistants knew that Clark and Superman were the same person, so they drew him that way. Now, some of that was because some of these guys had just one male face.
Right.
That they could draw.
Classic Alex Raymond.
Who took over carrying the pirates from Smith.
Sure.
Basically had one face. And he usually, he says, well, this guy looks just like this guy, except his hair is blonde. And this guy, just like this. Yeah, so it was one of these things where we're going, Clark, without your glasses, you look like Superman.
And everybody
Jimmy, without those fronts, you look like Harry, without the cigar,
Lois, without those breasts.
You look just like
Lois, just the white light, you look a little like Be careful. But,
the silliness can get out of hand. One of my absolutely favorite page ever published in a comic book was a 1958, I think, Superman story. The crew of the Daily Planet is at a beach picnic, and Clark, they're all out there, and Lois is snooping around trying to discover Clark's identity, because this is a story called The Day Lois discovered Superman, Clark and Superman, whatever.
Yeah.
And so they're at the beach, and
Did she have a metal detector?
No.
Oh,
but
wait, it's him.
She's checking everybody's possessions for a costume hidden there, and Clark's going, "Good thing mine is super compressed in the toe of my shoe." And then she's going around like she knows that it's got to be a member of the Daily Planet. However, she has deduced that. She has come to that conclusion. And now she's checking out all the guys. She's going around, and
Lois is a perv, right?
Clark is ready for this stuff. He has a foam rubber arm, human arm.
Hilarious.
He buries himself, twists himself into the sand. Buries himself into has the arm there. So in case Lois comes along and squeezes his muscle, it'll feel
like popping fruit.
But then, oh irony of irony, Lois just passes right by Clark and doesn't even check him out. And Clark is going, oh, what the hell? What's wrong with
I
me?
went
It's
to
like,
all this work.
No. You don't want her to know. Why are you just... Because back then, the relationship between, Superman and Lois was that between a 10-year-old and his older sister.
It was awfully cruel.
Yeah.
Boy, those guys were on some psychedelics.
But I mean, that was the level of explanation they got to, and the modern day explanations, though using bigger words and sounding more technical, are no less silly.
Fair enough. Absolutely. That's awesome. Real fast, because I'm curious and loving Superman, especially the history of Superman. There's Kurt Swan, there's Wayne Boring as far as the classic runs. But as you mentioned, Roger, the assistants, the other men that drew Superman, is there a favorite? Mine was Win Mortimer. I always loved his covers for World's Finest and the like and everything, and I thought he was an exceptional Superman artist.
I always liked Wayne Boring.
Sure.
Wayne
Interesting.
I'm old enough that Wayne was the Superman artist when I was coming along, and then Kurt sort of supplanted him to the point where initially there were guys like Al Plastino who were aping Wayne's, and eventually they wound up aping Kurt's because that became the thing. Yeah. But besides those two, Dick Sprang actually did a number of Superman stories, mainly for World's Finest, but occasionally with Superman title, and it was really choice stuff. It was great.
I will go with Win Mortimer. Somebody is doing a book on the Superman assistant, the artist after
the studio,
and he contacted me and asked if I'd like to do it, and I said I'd love to do a chapter about Win Mortimer.
Well, you're going to have to tell me who that is. I got to get them on. That'd be great.
And when I did a little more research, Win drew a few of my Supergirl stories in Superman.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah. So as I had met him a few times, and I had a story about meeting him that I was able to use and all that. But when I started doing the research, Win Mortimer, who is, you will remember from Spidey Electric Company, doing this
Spidey Super Stories.
Yeah, Spidey Super Stories. He was DC's lead artist throughout the 1950s. He was their main cover artist. He did over 350 covers for them. He was a regular artist on not only Superman but Batman as well, working in two different offices, which is very rare.
Wow!
And he was all over the place. He was one of the top artists of the 50s.
That's awesome. You guys have your favorite Superman, and obviously the old timers it could be.
Mine's
and
Jerry.
You can't say yours.
And I understand that absolutely, Jerry. Hell yeah, man.
Mine, I liked Jack Burnley, and he
Sure.
did some great covers back in the 40s.
Beautiful covers.
But in a probably more of my era would be Jose Luis Garcia Lopez.
Absolutely.
And I really do love Kurt Swan. I thought Kurt Swan was just a really great human being. He was a great guy.
Yes, he was.
But Jose, he captured the Christopher Reeve kind of vibe with it.
Elegance.
And and his work is flawless. I don't think I've ever seen a bad drawing from him.
Definitely not.
That's awesome. More absolutely. More fan questions. Sir,
two of you guys, Roger and Jerry, you were involved with marrying Superman and Lois, and all you mainly wrote before they got married, and you recently wrote him as a father, so I was wondering if you could all talk a little about what your preference was. You prefer single, married?
I grew up with Superman being single, but having been married made sense in the whole post-crisis storylines that we were doing. I don't know how many people of you know this, but originally we did the Crisis of the Crimson Kryptonite, where Mxyzptlk has created this red kryptonite, which basically takes away Superman's powers. He's just an ordinary mortal being, and he has to deal with that over an arc of stories. And the original plan was over the stories. Clark realizes, well, gee, I'm an ordinary man now, and sort of proposes to Lois. And originally, this, as conceived, the story would be that he gets his powers back and he's going, oh, and you have to break it up somehow. And Jerry was writing the ultimate issue of that, and you had a problem. It didn't seem real. Yeah. It seemed fake to suddenly break them up after all they'd been through there. And you talked to Mike Carlin and said, what if she says yes? And
You were the next phone call then, as Roger's book came out.
Mike called me up and said, "We're doing this." He says, "Yeah," and Lois turns him down ultimately, and he says, Jerry said, "What if she says yes?" And I thought for a second, I went, "Wow, that would change everyone's perceptions of this, because everyone's going to expect, well, they'll break up, and that always happens." He says, "What if she says yes?" And the more we talked, the better it sounded. And he says, "Go for it." Yeah. And then we were saying, okay, they're engaged. And we figured, a nice long engagement. Because that was the problem thing that bugged me with Spider-Man and Mary Jane. It's like, let's get married. Okay, we're married.
Right.
Wait, what? That's it?
Where's the marketing?
I envisioned that engagement could last as long as they were even around. It didn't have to happen.
Yeah.
They could break up. They could whatever.
Yeah, all sorts of things can happen. But we started developing the stuff, and then I said, well, the thing that always bugged me with The Flash is Barry and Iris get married, and he doesn't tell her. He doesn't tell her?
Until the honeymoon. She doesn't know.
The whole thing. And finally,
what?
Jerry Garrick's wife says, "What are you doing? This is crazy." And so he said, on their first anniversary, he says, "I'm going to tell her." And he tells her, and she says, "Yeah, I know, you talk in your sleep."
That's right.
Really? So we have Ozzie and Harriet. So I'm going like, wait a minute. If Clark and Lois love each other and are becoming a couple and trusting, this isn't something you say for the wedding night or your first anniversary. So he says, she has to tell him. She has to tell her. So we developed that thing, and that I think that worked out.
Well, what's funny too is historically within that time frame, there were actually a couple of good things in Superman 4, the movie. They were not major things. They were the interactions when Lois goes to see Clark.
Yep.
And I think that really made it clear that Lois knew that Clark was Superman. There was an implication with, I don't remember if they outright did it, but that was in the back of my head too, with her accepting it, that she would kind of know. It wasn't like she'd be totally, flummoxed and go, "What? I'd never thought that."
Yeah.
So I think all those little things happen organically when we were working on the book. And there were always stories that would just take a little turn because we would, you plot something out and then you'd be drawing it maybe a month or 2 months later, and you could kind of have the benefit of living with it for a period of time, and it wasn't that rush of deadline, especially writing and drawing it too. Sometimes I'd be at that drawing stage and it'd be like, this feels like it should go this way. And the wonderful thing about working with people who were all on the same page is that nobody, like Roger could have said, this is horrible, I quit. I mean, it's not unheard of, but we were all like, hey Superman, we're all on the same team, you know. And that was the great part about being part of that group dynamic, was that the group was the right group. I mean, when I was there, we all got along, we fought, but we had the ultimate goal of trying to make the best story.
And that was another great thing, is getting each other's work in progress.
Yeah.
Back before email, DC paid FedEx a lot of money because every week we'd all get a packet of photocopies of each other's works in progress. Here's this plot, here's the pencils to that, here's the inks and letters on this one. So we'd see stuff going back and forth. So it really helped with the cohesiveness. So it was one of these things where I always used to joke, if Jimmy Olsen breaks his arm one week in Superman, next week in Adventures of Superman, he has a cast on it.
Right.
Preferably on the correct arm.
Right.
You can catch things like that.
Sorry, Roger, I broke both arms. I couldn't remember.
Oh, no!
God, I'm sorry because we're running out of time. And God, I could go on for hours with you guys. And
if you let us, we will.
And believe me, expect some emails to set up some podcast conversations. I'm willing to continue the discussion. But gentlemen, truly, thank you for your contributions to Superman, comics in general, and for talking to us today.
Man, what a great discussion. So excited to talk about Superman with those guys, and I hope you enjoyed it on today's Word Balloon. Again, thanks for listening. We'll talk to you next time. Word Balloon is a copyright feature of Shaky Productions, copyright 2018.